Coming up on this week's edition of NCBA's Cattleman to Cattleman.
We have some encouraging news on how U.S. beef exports have fared so far in 2018. Plus, we'll tell you how you can get hands-on cattle care training at stockmanship and stewardship events across the country.
Now, from the Denver headquarters of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, it's NCBA's Cattleman to Cattleman.
Hello and welcome to NCBA's Cattleman to Cattleman. I'm Kevin Ochsner. Topping this week's show, international demand for U.S. beef remains strong, and this year's export market is running well ahead of last year's pace. This means 2018's exports could easily surpass last year's numbers and establish a new all-time record. According to data released by USDA and compiled by the U.S. Meat Export Federation, July beef exports climbed 12% in volume to just over 116,000 metric tons, while export value surged 16% to $722 million. For January through July, beef exports are up 10% in volume and 20% in value compared to the same time period last year. Global population growth is one of the factors increasing demand for U.S. beef in countries around the world. Another is the work of the U.S. Meat Export Federation, or USMEF, which has worked to increase demand for U.S. red meat overseas. Brian Baxter has more on this valuable organization.
Headquartered in Denver, but with offices worldwide, USMEF operates much like a state beef council, working to educate consumers on the high quality of U.S. beef. Their audience just happens to be international instead of domestic.
USMEF is the United States Meat Export Federation, and this is a group of people staffed out of Denver but located all over the world to help us build relationships in foreign countries such as China, Japan, Mexico, Canada, the Caribbean, and they're in those countries developing relationships with the culture and people of the country to allow us to export beef to those countries. We have to understand how they cook and what they like, and can we build a demand for U.S. beef there, and how do we do it?
The difference between an international consumer and a domestic U.S. consumer is different cultures have priorities on what they like to eat, and so it just happens to be across the world there's different cultures that will pay a premium for our products that necessarily the U.S. consumer doesn't particularly want to pay a premium for. So we can ship those products overseas, collect a premium for them, and it's a win-win situation for everybody.
So USMEF has the ability country to country to really know what that consumer's thinking. And it's really neat to see how consumer preferences are very different. USMEF has the ability to understand that, and I think from a producer myself who pays into the checkoff, you know, there's a real sense of pride here in the fact that we have this entity that is all over the world and can go out there and market beef and get it to consumers and get it to them in a way that they want it.
I think what helps make U.S. beef so easy for us to promote overseas is that the quality is excellent. We're able to differentiate it from the competition and really create that separation from what's out there as far as other competition, and that adds a lot of value to it then.
As a contractor to the beef checkoff, USMEF receives a portion of their funding not only from the beef checkoff, but other commodity checkoffs that also have an interest in international markets and beef exports.
As a checkoff in Kansas, Kansas Corn has supported the U.S. Meat Export Federation for decades. We feel it's really important. We'd actually prefer that corn not leave the state as corn. We'd like it to leave as beef or as ethanol, as a value-added product. And so we continue to support U.S. Meat Export Federation.
I think it's very important to have them as a contractor for the beef checkoff. One, there are cuts of beef that are not consumed in the United States that the Asian markets do. It's a delicacy over there. So it's an added value to the carcass of our animals to be able to export that to nations that appreciate it.
We've seen a lot of good return on investment, if you will, from investing in USMEF with checkoff dollars and state checkoff dollars. So there's a lot of collaborative work that happens. We will work with them through the Federation directly, through the Beef Promotion Operating Committee and joint investment there, as well as states joining in on efforts on their own with their 50 cents kept at home. The return on that investment, we learned this week, is anywhere from almost $3.50 up to over $12 per dollar invested. And if we could do that with every dollar we invest as farmers and ranchers, we would have a lot better years than we do sometimes right now. So that's very important, coming back to our own pocketbooks on our farms.
NCBA enjoys a cooperative relationship with USMEF and is proud to support their mission of putting U.S. meat on the world's table.
The U.S. Meat Export Federation is a vital partner in our trade efforts across the world. And by working together, especially with USMEF, has offices across the world, and the staff in those different countries provide on-the-ground intelligence. And so it's really important to have that information, and NCBA carry out the policy side of things and working with the governments.
All of our activities and efforts that we are doing are in the international markets to build demand and educate the buyers and educate the consumers on why U.S. beef is better than the competition. So we don't necessarily do a lot of research or things like that. So NCBA does that, so they have a lot of information and materials on beef and beef production that we can utilize then in the international markets to be able to sell it and explain why our product's different. And then also there's the different programs, you know, like BQA, things like that, that we use when we talk about the beef production system in the U.S. and, you know, the advantages and what we do to ensure that we've got the highest quality, you know, safest beef available on the markets. So I'm always excited when you're there and they're tasting it, you know, they put it in their mouth and they get a big smile and they're like, wow, you know, this American beef is really delicious. So they're like saying like, American beef wa totemo oishii desu ne. So this means, wow, it's very delicious. So, you know, that's what I like to hear, and that's what we're producing here.
I'm Brian Baxter reporting for NCBA's Cattleman to Cattleman.
And joining me now is Дэna Holstrema, President and CEO of the U.S. Meat Export Federation. Dan, we just took a look at some of the great work that USMEF does to build demand for U.S. beef around the globe. And I guess I'm curious, how do you build demand? What are the strategies you use to build demand in so many diverse markets?
Well, Kevin, it varies, as you can imagine, but two of the basic things that go across all markets is education, for one. Telling our story, differentiating ourselves versus the competition. Education really goes into everything that we do in one way, shape, or form. The other thing that we do in most of these markets as they evolve and develop is, you know, we then get into the promotion mode where we, which was really the tip of the spear after all that educational work is done. And I really don't think there's any better example of that than what we've seen in Korea. Korea is absolutely on fire at the moment, and it's really the culmination of a lot of work, because if you remember pre-BSE,
right,
where Korea at that point was on fire at that time.
Big market for us, yeah.
Big market. And what we then went 2 or 3 years where we were out of the market, and we've been scratching back ever since. And through many, many years now, going on, what, 14, 15 years since we've re-entered, we've seen slow, steady growth back into Korea. And this is a result of a lot of this work that I'm talking about. And I'm happy to report that in 2018 to date, that for the first time since BSE, the U.S. market share of imports has exceeded that of Australia. So this is really, we're at about a 50% share of imports versus 43% with Australia. And this, in my mind, is really a monumental accomplishment in the fact that it's been a long, hard slog since we saw BSE hit in 2003.
Yeah, and you know, earlier in the show, we talked about some of the record-setting work that you're doing in U.S. beef exports, the good news for beef producers. Dan, do you think there's still room for more growth?
I definitely do think there is. I mean, we're seeing emerging economies all over the world. We're seeing increasing per capita consumption in places like Japan and Korea, our two of our larger markets. And in the case of Korea, last year we were at $1.2 billion in sales, which is a record for Korea. And this year we're 20% above that. So we're going to be well in excess of probably maybe approaching $2 billion just for Korea. So, this is exciting. We were $7.3 billion in total last year, which was a record on value.
Right.
And we're running, 15 to 20% up this year.
It's great news.
So I think all things considered, there is room for growth in the emerging markets and the established markets. And if we're only 50% market share of imports in places like Japan and Korea, pre-BSE we were 70%, there's room for growth.
So let's talk about some of the emerging markets. What are some of the net new markets or growing markets that you see for our products?
Yeah, I think in the last 5 years, two regions that really stand out are Central and South America.
Okay.
If you look at any one country, they're relatively small, but you add them up, places like Guatemala, Panama, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Colombia in South America, Peru, as a total, it's really impressive, the growth. So that's one area that's already going. And another area that's new, fairly new in the last 2 or 3 years is Africa. West Africa and South Africa, Angola, Ghana stand out. And in fact, our second largest region for beef variety meats last year was Africa, behind Egypt. So, I think this is indicative of, you have the youngest demographic in the world, billion plus people in Africa, and it's the youngest demographic in the world.
Wow.
And you're starting to see a very small middle class slowly expanding. So I think this is, and we've been doing work there now for 4 years actively. And I think we're starting to see some of the fruits of our work come through.
That's fantastic. You can't pick up a newspaper today without reading something about trade wars and tariffs. And I know it's a hot topic in all of agriculture and all of America, frankly. Should we as beef producers be concerned, Dan?
Well, I think anytime you're talking tariffs on our goods going into a market, just economics tells you, yes, we need to be concerned. And the best example that I could give you right now on the beef side would be China at the moment. Early July, in retaliation to some of the ongoing issues with China, we saw our beef duties increase 25%. We went from, roughly 12% up to 37% now. And I'll be honest with you, I was pretty worried when that happened because, we already have a very high value product going in there that's hormone free and beta agonist free, et cetera. But I was surprisingly welcome to see the July stats. The July stats came out, and just to give you some background, January to June, we were averaging about 600 tons a month direct into China, which isn't a lot, but it's up from where it started a year ago. And in the month of July, which was the first month with duties, we ran about 500 tons. So honestly, I was expecting it was better than I expected, and I think it just drives home the fact that China is looking for our high quality, tasty beef. They have a lot of beef in China that's imported, but it's Australian grass-fed, it's Brazilian, it's Indian buffalo meat. I mean, you can't find a knife sharp enough to cut that. But so we're being compared against other types of product that are not really what we're targeting. So I think it's just a testament to the fact that there is demand for our beef in China.
So what's the final message you'd share with our members and our viewers relative to beef exports and the work of USMEF?
Well, I think, it's the work of USMEF, but we have a lot of partners out there, and there's no partner greater than NCBA and the beef checkoff. We get a lot of funding from the beef checkoff, and it's very, very much appreciated. And I think you see it through our work, the results, and. I think a good example of some other work that needs to be done is we still have an issue with Japan. Japan's our largest value market, over $2 billion in sales. But we are at a duty differential currently. Australia has a free trade agreement where they're about a 12% duty advantage going in. So this is a good example where we partner with NCBA and the team in DC, and we're not a policy organization. NCBA is on the beef side, and so we partner very closely with NCBA, and we provide a lot of intel that comes back from the markets, and we support them. And this is a good example of working together to leverage these dollars.
Yeah. Demand growth really is based on both policy as well as demand generation. It takes both of those elements, doesn't it?
Yep. You need the markets open to capitalize. So in that regard, we definitely appreciate the partnership.
Fantastic. Dan, thank you for coming and sharing with us your insight.
My pleasure, anytime.
To learn more about the work of the U.S. Meat Export Federation and its efforts to enhance U.S. beef demand overseas, visit their website at usmef.org. And don't forget, NCBA is committed to improving the business climate for U.S. cattle producers and growing global beef demand. But that success depends in part on a strong membership base. Joining is easy. Just call 1-866-233-3872, or you can visit the website ncba.org.